Uh, Thanks very much, David. Before I commence my talk today, I too want to acknowledge Ghana country, acknowledge elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge the passing of Dr. O'Donoghue just recently. She was a woman who was a very strong advocate for Indigenous self-determination, being the inaugural chair of APSIC, and a major player in the formation of the Native Title Act. And if we didn't have someone like her actually driving that particular advocacy, we may have been in a worse spot than what we are. So I just wanted to acknowledge Dr. O'Donoghue's contribution. I also want to acknowledge CNTA. The CNTA has, as David has indicated, has been there for a long time, really supporting the professional development of anthropologists in the field. And if it was not for the CNTA, I think that the system would be, in a poorer place for it. So, congratulations for all the work that the CNTA has done over the years. While Kim is sorting out my PowerPoint with loose cords, I probably should make some disclaimers. So the topic of workforce capability is not really my expertise at all. I don't have any expertise in HR work, but it's something that has exercised my mind for some time, particularly when I was with Queensland South Native Title Services. As the work was evolving, I was wondering whether the workforce was actually fit for that evolution. And we have done some radical things at QSNTS, and I'm glad to see the team here today. And it's something that really is really important. I think that we need to have a really serious conversation about it. And the topic of this conference actually invites us to do that. I also want to say that this system at times behaves like it's hermetically sealed, like it's in its own little bubble that doesn't interact with the outside world. Now, that's not a criticism. It is actually the features of a system that only came into creation 30 years ago, or 32 years ago, with the Mabo judgment, and there was a lot of evolving that needed to happen. But my presentation today is about being realistic about where the system fits within the broader economy, and so I'm going to commence by talking about things like megatrends, and I think we need to have a conversation about them. I then want to get into the specific native title challenges. So this is probably a discussion around the demands, the drivers, and the supply issues around workforce. And then I will have a conversation about some of the imperatives that we need to do, and then obviously just try to bring people up to date with some recent developments. So I'll spend most of those times traversing all those things. And as you'll probably pick up over this, for someone who's got a PowerPoint presentation, it extends over 32 points, slides. So I haven't actually mastered that, but please bear with me as we go through that. So there, I've pretty much given you that introduction to begin with. I wanted to start this presentation of talking about megatrends and what is happening in the broader labour market. Now, I know very little about these things, but it was interesting that just last October, the Jobs and Skills Australia, so an authority within the Australian government, released a report around the next 10 years of where the work is going to be. And I think this sector needs to be attuned to what is happening at a broader macro level, because there are opportunities and there are plenty of threats, and they're very evenly balanced. And unless we actually understand how threats can be converted into opportunities and vice versa, then we're going to be in a world of pain. So we actually need to know these things. There are a number of mega trends that are out there at the moment, and people have obviously seen these things in strategic planning and the like. But I think there are clearly, well, as the report says, there are three major mega trends that are impacting upon the labour market in Australia. The first one is digital transformation and automation and the emergence of AI. I think that this is actually going to be an important thing for First Nations people, the digital transformation. It'll actually bridge the geographical divide and also will enable them to enhance an emerging concept around data sovereignty. So digital transformation is important. The clean energy and net zero transformation. So net zero by 2050 is something that is exercising all politicians, the private sector, regulators and the like. And it's an area that is already entering the native title space. I know in Queensland South Native Title Services, who are carving farming projects all over the place. And just from a national role, I've seen that there's obviously the mining of critical minerals is obviously going to become an important feature into the future, but also projects, the prospect of joint venturing as the economy transforms. So it's real. It's taken a long time to get here, but it's actually here now, and it's an opportunity for First Nations to seize that opportunity. And we as a system will need to be working within those changes. I thought I'd put the growth of the care economy, and this is probably one of the biggest mega trends that's impacting upon the labour market in Australia. And I put it here mainly because, and I'm going to emphasise it because I think that there are people, if people are not inclined to enter this space, there's plenty of competition for them to go somewhere else. So if there's people that are inclined to work in different industries, then, the prospective pool of employees may gravitate to these other areas. So we are in competition. This system is in competition with a market for people who actually will gravitate to these areas. So we just really need to be conscious of this. The report, the skills and jobs report doesn't talk about the two other mega trends, but I think they're important. And it's the geopolitical tensions that are in the world at the moment. And it's because of those geopolitical tensions, the critical minerals and just security around energy and the like is actually going to be heightened. And in a safe country like Australia, this is actually going to magnify the opportunities there. So I think it's actually an important one. So, and also because China and India to combine make up the bulk of the population of the world, and they happen to be in the Pacific Rim, they are actually going to be, it's a consumer economy, and we will be contributing to that consumer economy. So there are big mega trends that are at play, and that's obviously going to impact upon the labour market into the future. Now, I've got some statistics here, and I'll be preparing a more detailed paper with all the references and the like, but I just thought I'd include this particular slide around the stats. It's clear that there is a shortage of jobs and a shortage of people to provide to actually enter the jobs they're in high demand. And there's this thing called the skills priority list. And what I was interested to see was last year was the first year that actually solicitors entered this list. And as someone who is a legal practitioner in the past, I thought that there was always going to be enough lawyers in the system. But actually, in working with Queensland South over the last couple of years, and I've noticed this moving to the tribunal, but also conversations I've had with other people in the native title system, we're finding it very, very difficult to recruit lawyers to the system. And it was interesting that as a cohort, people are not entering the legal profession as much as they did in the past. So If we're heavily dependent upon that market and people are entering that market, or it's actually joining this critical the skills priority list, I think that we're in for there's a bit of a shock coming. Anthropologists come under the title of social professionals, and that cohort wasn't on the actual list. But I suspect it's because the sample size is small, and these things are also employer driven. So unless employers are actually contributing to the list to actually say that there are shortages, then the data won't come in there. But what we will pick up over the next couple of days is clearly that there's a supply challenge around anthropologists entering the native title system. But I think that's actually just it's something that we should probably be mindful of. I was also interested in some of the trends that of the various occupations, and it was interesting to see, and it's not surprising, where there is a gender imbalance, they're the ones where there's a shortage. So if you're truck drivers in the manufacturing industry and it's male dominated, that's where the shortages were, and conversely, in the care sector where there's a preponderance of female employees, that's where the shortages were as well. That might actually have implications on this system, because I know from the CNTA surveys that this sector, the research, the anthropology sector, is there's a higher number of women that are in the system. The regional remote area is probably not a surprise, but it's still shocking nonetheless that it's going to be difficult to recruit to remote and regional areas, and that's where we do our work, isn't it? And if generally it's very, people are finding it very difficult, employers are finding it difficult to recruit to these areas, then if we want to go and live in those areas with partners who can't find work and so forth, it's going to be an impediment to this system as well. I just think we've got to be really attuned to that. And the third point was I have to say, it wasn't a surprise to me. Throwing more bucks at the problem that didn't seem to actually change the increase of people. So there's something more at play, and it's obviously these other things that are at play, and that's people want job security, people want a career pathway, they want flexibility in their work conditions, and I think COVID actually told us that we were never going to go back to a time where it's 9 to 5, 5 days a week, although I'm sure there are a number of employers that are actually starting to wish that was the case. I just think that's flexibility is here to stay, and that's actually a good thing. So the projections over the next decade are those three ones on the top. I think the two, and that's in descending order. So the healthcare and social assistance area is going to be the highest. But I have to say professional, scientific and technical services and the education and training sector were a close second and third. So, and these two areas are the areas that are going to be the growth areas. And this is my double-edged sword here. It's good for anthropologists and lawyers and other professionals, but from a prospective pool of employees, it also causes some problems. It's also good to see that all states and territories are going to expect an increase. But sadly, I have to say that South Australia was probably the lowest in the scheme of things. But nevertheless, it was still bound to grow over the next 10 years. And you can see in those four areas, it's going to be tertiary qualified people, greater digital skills will be required, and that's actually a good thing to deal with geographical boundaries. Energy sector is clearly going to be a focus, and there's going to be regional variation, which you'd expect as you go along. Okay, so I probably already alluded to some of the opportunities and threats, but I think from these big mega trends, First Nations people have got an opportunity to participate in a new economy, an emerging, and an economy that's going to be here to stay. It's going to be the hallmarks of the economy into the future. Digital transformation is really important. The Federal Court and the Tribunal have been talking about the need for a digitisation project around getting all the material that's been in the court and in the tribunal digitised. And there's an amazing archive there that needs to be drawn upon, and it's going to be important for the next phase of work as well, because there's really a lot of information in there, and it needs to be utilised. I've already made the comment about it can be a bridge to span the geographical divide, and I think Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will orbit in and out of their communities, and they will need to have digital capability to deal with those things. And this growing concept of data sovereignty, and I noticed the Closing the Gap statistics were handed down, the interim ones were handed down yesterday, but data sovereignty is pushing ahead as a really important feature into the future. The native title system, I think, needs to leverage this roadmap for the future. So there's a piece of work that's going in Australia at a macro level, and the native title system needs to be cognizant of it and actually and use it, leverage it. And I'll try to expand upon some of those things a little bit later. But what I was particularly interested in is a reform measure in this roadmap is around the need to join up vocational education and training with higher education. There was a conversation I was actually having with David Trigger just a couple of weeks ago where we spoke about there needs to be a pathway of certificates and that can lead into other education. So I think joining up the education pathways are really important. And that's actually a priority reform area in this new strategy. So I think we've got to get our head across it and understand how we're going to move forward with it. The final point of an opportunity is, and this particular roadmap actually says that First Nations are at the centre of it. And that was the quote. First Nations are at the centre of this reform. And I would hope that the Closing the Gap agreement can actually be used in tandem with this project, because, as I said yesterday, the Closing the Gap stats came out again. They weren't very good. I didn't get down to the minutiae, but obviously training and education is critical, and we need to get those two pieces aligned. The threats, I've already made the comment several times now, but we've just got to be mindful. There's a lot of people out there, and I think that they will they'll move with their feet. And as David Trigger just said, if universities are out there saying that this is a moribund area, don't go there or whatever, then that's actually a really bad message to send. And people and young people and anyone who's just wanting to change career will vote with their feet, and they'll vote with their feet in this very these prospective areas. So we've really got to be mindful about the messaging that's being delivered around this. And the final point here is time is of the essence. Universities are obviously going through this transformation, but we need to be able to persuade them that this is actually an industry and a viable industry, and it needs to support it. But now let's just turn to native title, because the mega trends, we need to know them, but they are being superimposed upon really serious demands and supply issues in the native title area. But we've known about this for some time, and I've just taken because, as I say, it's the 30th anniversary of the Implementation Act. So the Act, obviously came into being in 1993, but it was implemented as of the 1st of January 2024. But I have to say, 15 years ago, Graham Neate, the late Graham Neate, president of the NNTT, made some comments about the future of the work. And I think, and people who know Graham, who knew Graham, he was a very considered man. And for him to come out and make a statement like this, I was surprised when I heard this at the time that he would actually come out and say this, but it just shows that, and I think it was the time of the institutional changes or preceding the institutional changes when the mediation work would go from the tribunal to the court or predominantly. And I think he just wanted to get some things out. And I think he did a good job of doing that. And I go back to the past to underscore that the issues that he spoke about 15 years ago are here now, but they're compounded. So excuse me for just going back in time a little bit, but I think it's actually important. So back in 2008, when Graham wrote the speech, there weren't clearly as many determinations as there are now. And obviously the land mass, Petronella spoke about the 60% of the land mass of native title as well as land rights legislation. But back in those days, just from a native title perspective, it was only 12% of the land mass of Australia. But there were 497 claims. It's really hard to believe that there were that many claims in the system 15 years ago, but there were, and they were predominantly across Western Australia, Northern Territory, and Queensland. It's interesting that statistic, that second last one, that 50.5% of the land mass was covered by determinations of single claimant applications, but 9.4% of them were overlapped. And in the area that I know Queensland South, and sorry, my Queensland South colleagues, you're a wealth of knowledge over there and experience, and I just want to draw upon, because in many respects, and I've said it many times, Queensland South Native Title Services area is a microcosm of the whole country. And I think that, obviously there are a lot of overlap claims in that area, and it wasn't surprising to see 4, 5, and sometimes up to 6 overlaps in the areas in that area. But we've seen that in other places as well. I just want to talk about this slide. So this is Graham's slide to explain that the first 10 or so years, there needed to be this foundational piece that had to occur. And then we saw a spike once the test cases and the like started to bed down. And I use this slide because I think that native title compensation jurisprudence is likely to follow a similar trajectory. We've had the Timber Creek judgment in March of 2019, and I'll get a bit more into the statistics in a minute, but we haven't had the influx of compensation claims that one was anticipating. But I suspect that there's going to be a need for the development of the jurisprudence. And if you look at the native title first phase of the recognition phase, it's going to take some time to bed down. And I think that map or that slide actually depicts the growth period. Graham made the observations that the delays were around the original framing of the Act, but there was a reluctance to settle claims, and because the law was unsettled, and there was also a lot of political controversy around. And similarly, even though we've got compensation settlements occurring across the country, I think there will be a reluctance to settle until there's actually a body of guiding principles that can actually inform the negotiation table. But nevertheless, that was the same effect there. The Wick case also increased the number of claims that were brought into the system. And as I've made the point, it took a long time for the test cases to develop, and we should be actually looking at this as a trend into the native title compensation area. So Graham's point around the resolution rate. So basically, he was talking about the claims at the top of Australia, and it's terrible to generalise, but I think that this is probably, looking back in time, it's probably a fair statement that those ones are going to be less complex because the continuity of connection is going to be easier to prove, and the tenure landscape was different. So the extinguishment was not as complex as you move in a southerly direction. So I don't think that's controversial. Claims over more densely settled areas would occur with time, and that's actually a third with time. Resolving overlaps will remain a challenge. This point around preserving evidence and cultural knowledge, Graham quite rightly pointed out that that was a pressing concern 15 years ago. And I actually have to say that it has only increased in criticality. And we know that because of, obviously, as we move into the various next phases, we will need to have evidence preserved. But it's not just evidence preserved in a court sense. We need to preserve cultural knowledge for a broader range of reasons. And so this particular item is going to be important for the viability of the system. And I want to come back to that in a tick. And this final point is really, if there was a recurring theme through this presentation, it's this. It's that this system is it's an integrated whole, and the performance of the system depends upon the performance of the institutional participants. And so coordination is critical. It was critical 15 years ago, and I'm actually here to say that it's far more critical today because of the complexity that I've just been foreshadowing. Now, let's shoot to where we are now. So if native title back 15 years ago was being prosecuted in that linear fashion, it was very sequential, and it was mainly focused around the recognition phase, what we are observing now is that it's becoming layered and more complex, and it's actually across a range of things there. And all those dot points, many of those things are visiting us now. So it's the residual claimant application. So there's 130 odd currently on the docket. I'm just focusing on NCDAs here. I won't talk about non-claimant applications and others. But yeah, claimant applications, there's still, from the 490 odd 15 years ago, we're down to 130 odd. But the NNTC, the National Native Title Council's forecasting around this area, around prospective claims, there was a prediction of another 170 to 200 coming into the system. So there's still a long way to go in this first phase. Variation applications, there haven't been many, but there will need to be variation applications, and I get into that in the next slide. Compensation applications, as I say, there have been compensations matters in the past, but the Timber Creek case was really the first High Court pronouncement of it, and it's clearly that the work is coming. And then there's a swathe of other work. Obviously, if we're moving to a transforming economy, there's going to be more projects, agreement making. There's going to be the implementation of rights. PBC governance is going to remain a challenge. When 70% of PBCs are not sufficiently resourced, but they're expected to do a raft of things under the CATSI Act and and the PBC regulations, there will be a governance issue. And and we're seeing that now. I have to say, we're actually seeing that phase of native title now where PBC governance is causing an issue. And in fact, matters have actually been coming before the federal court around this area. I think we haven't had any applications to replace PBCs, but that is a natural extension. If ORIC can't, if the special administration doesn't work there, they may go into liquidation, and there then may need to be a replacement PBC set up. So this work is going to come. And running parallel to all of this is the Future Act regime, cultural heritage. And the cultural heritage regime has still to go through its reform post Juukan Gorge. So we've had the inquiry, this Joint Standing Committee inquiry into Juukan Gorge. There are a number of recommendations in there, including reforming the Native Title Act. And we're yet to see how that will play out, but it will be a significant contributor to the broader landscape. And indeed, statutory land rights is also going to be there. Now, this map, sorry about the resolution of this. It wouldn't be the NNTT if I didn't provide a map. So there's Geo, the team. Thanks very much. So But this map actually is a little bit different from the maps that we produced, because I was actually interested to know if the NNTC said there was 170 to 200 claims to enter the system. I asked our mapping teams to just do some mapping around where the prospective claims might come from, and that didn't yield too much success. So we actually just had to have a further conversation around where were the past claims. And I think past claims may have been withdrawn for a range of reasons, but it's reasonable to infer that those past claims will resurrect, particularly if those claims were withdrawn for strategic reasons to focus on core country, and or the connection evidence was deficient in some way, and resources, a whole range of things. So I think the gap areas are going to obviously be where those new applications will come into play. You can't see it very well from this map, but there were a number of C claims very early in the piece, and they were withdrawn. But C claims will actually come back. And if we're actually talking about a transitioning economy where wind farms and using wind turbines might be part of that mix, and even though the Future Act regime doesn't extend offshore, I mean, if you're talking about First Nations being able to access their Indigenous estate, which is also sea country, there's going to be also a role to play there. So I think it's natural to think that, yeah, there will be sea claims coming in. They'll be coming in fairly soon. I've used this language. I'll go to the next slide around how I broke that up. So you can see that there's 499. So we haven't reached the 500 mark yet of where native title exists in whole or in part. And so that represents 44.7% of the landmass of Australia, and that is significant. And then when you add on the statutory regimes, there's quite a lot in the Indigenous estate. There are 274 RNTBCs, PBCs, and if we say that there's going to be another 100 or so claims into the system, it's reasonable to think that RNTBC number will probably increase to 320. And then when you've got that figure, that's going to largely be the bodies that actually bring the compensation claims. So, I think that that's a challenge that's going to be on the horizon around how they get supported. But yeah, I've also used that logic of there are standalone claims and consolidation claims, and the reason why I've used that language is it's reasonable to infer that people will want to deal with consolidating their estate before they actually move to the compensation phase. So that's why I've used that language. So in due course, there'll be less standalone claims and more consolidation claims. And then when that gets to that point, then it naturally will progress into compensation claims. There will be an increase in revision applications. As I say there's only one current one, but there have been 14 in the past. And under the 2021 amendments to the Native Title Act, where the right to by agreement have determinations over national parks, you will anticipate there will be a number of revision applications to deal with that. The right to take for any purpose, I think, post Aqaba, many consent determinations have actually included that right, but it's not logical to think that that the right to take only started after the Aqaba case. We're going to have to retrofit the determinations because people obviously traded with each other, and there has to be a right to take. And I think that's going to be subject matter for revision applications in the future. And we know that the pace of resolution, so, there are a number of determinations, and I have to say the federal court have done a good job in the case management of native title to get to that critical mass of determinations. But I have to say the pace in which it was done, there will be revision applications that deal with where apicals were left off or boundaries need rejigging and the like. So there's going to be this other work that's associated with the extant docket, and they're going to be revision applications. And I think it's only logical to think that people will need to deal with the revision applications, consolidate the estate before they in earnest move to the compensation phase, although we are seeing compensation quite clearly. All right, so I'm just conscious of the time. 10 minutes, okay. So the trends here, really, it just goes to Graham Mead's prescience, if you like. He was able to see, the things that he said, observations of the future, are clearly the ones that is the work where we are now. So overlaps, more complex claims, and this preservation of evidence issue, as I said, is really important. The AGD, the Attorney General's Department, has set up a preservation of evidence working group. It's somewhat of it's probably too narrowly defined for preservation of evidence. This actually should be preservation of cultural knowledge, of which preservation of evidence is a component of it. But let's not get into nomenclature. The reality is that it's a really important project. And one of the initiatives that's coming out of that project is, if we've got resource constraints, if knowledgeable old people are passing, we're going to have to take that opportunity and use the information that we acquire in that phase for multiple purposes. And those multiple purposes go to the slide that I was referring to before. They will be relevant in revision applications, compensation applications. Indeed, even when it comes to how common law holders agree as to who common law holders are, if old people have passed and that knowledge hasn't been documented in some way, then there are some challenges about how the laws and customs around recruitment to the group are going to be implemented. We're actually, I have to say, we're observing that already in the environment. So preserving evidence, preserving cultural knowledge, not solely for the purpose of bringing a claim, but for bringing multiple claims and dealing with multiple issues in a post-determination context. So this particular, if there's going to be an injection of resources, and if the skills of anthropologists and lawyers are needed, it's going to be this area here, because it's preserving evidence and knowledge for the next phases of native title, but also in perpetuity for a range of other things. So it's a really important project, and I think it's something that we need to all keep an eye on. So look, I just want to just skim across some tensions I think that are in the system at the moment. As we move into this next phase, rep body, NTRBs and SPs will inexorably find themselves in a conflict situation. So the gap areas that were in the past, you can't straddle the fence of representing 2-3 overlapping claims. In fact, it might be the point where the rep bodies will need to fund out all 3 of those, well, whatever number. I just think that's going to be, it's an inevitable thing, and rep bodies are going to have to deal with managing the inevitable conflicts of interest that will be raised, and that's an appropriate thing. This means that the private law system, the private sector, is going to actually need to absorb that work, but there will need to be an increase in brief out budgets to deal with that. I also think if we're talking about workforce and retention in the workforce, if rep bodies are the nurseries for both legal and anthropological work, then if we're not replacing those people at the same rate they're exiting, then I think we've got a bit of an existential threat. So, and I think that anthropologists, I know our colleagues in the West, I think Amy was saying last time I spoke to Simon and Amy over in Western Australia, was that, the rep bodies are finding it very hard to compete with the private sector for anthropological and archaeological work. So it's market forces are here and now. Look, I'll just briefly just sweep across what Darryl Rangi has said at the conference last year, the AXIS conference over in Perth. And, it's telling when the federal court comes to us, a large group of people, of stakeholders, and saying, we've got a problem. We've got a real problem, because if there are not enough lawyers and barristers and solicitors entering, there are not enough senior anthropologists to provide expert evidence in the system. We've got a problem that could bring the system. I mean, this is not Justice Rangi's words or the courts, but it could come to a halt at some point. So we need to actually start planning. And so this point about burnout, I know that CNTA's had that 70% of respondents said they might be leaving because of burnout. Well, the court's also aware of that, and they're seeing it from where they sit. So it's a real thing, and we need to deal with it. Just a few more slides here. And so Justice Rangi made comments where law schools aren't really focusing on on native title subjects. Anthropology departments are not doing, lifting the weight there either. There's not enough resources, and mob are feeling exhausted by the whole thing. And so that's what the court's observations were back in June of last year. But this is something that's not been new to us. I mean, obviously, the CNTA, but also the NNTT supported David Martin and Anthropos to do a work on where the challenges might be in the future. And there are 3 reports there, which I know Julie will probably talk to her own report soon. But it's clear that over the last 10, 20 years, these issues have been known to us that we need to start planning for. Now, I don't want to be melodramatic, but in saying that I am. I think it's, if you've got mega trends that are pointing in a certain direction, which could take the supply of prospective employees, and demand is going through the roof around, the complexity, but supply, there's not enough people entering the system. I mean, there's only one way this can end. So I just think that we've really got to be mindful of those things. And I make some points around, if it was to fail at this point, what would happen to the 30-year investment that we put into it to date? And it goes broader to how in-rem rights are at risk if you don't have a professional support system there for them. And, I think it puts at risk the aspiration of the preamble around a reconciled Australia. Anyway, so I'll just fly through the final one. So the imperative is that we are an integrated system, but we've got to start behaving like one. And there's enough reports that actually say that. There's got to be courses, there's got to be solutions that provide the common ground around professional recruitment, development, and retention, so that the common ground of diverse interests can be argued. If we don't actually have the critical mass of people there to actually be, to prosecute these matters and respond to them, then we're in a world of pain. I think the issue is that we really do need to develop a compelling, coherent system narrative and a commitment to prosecute a strategy within the broader labour market. I think we've behaved too much like the system itself by actually going into our respective corners and being almost adversarial about these things. We are facing a common threat, and we need to actually coalesce as an integrated system to deal with the systemic issues. And that's what my point is there. I'll just move ahead. Look, as I said, and then my disclaimer at the start, I'm not an expert in HR, workforce and job design, but I think these are some of the things that we need to have a look at. So our clients' needs are diverse, and I think we actually have to have skills that are diverse. And I mean, somewhat controversially, my view is that the specialization in this area is probably not the right way to go. I think people need to be across a range of areas. Lawyers need to know everything within the native title system, because it's really, you can't have a component of a niche area because that's actually building in redundancy. You need to be building skill sets around the post-determination phase, but you need to be cognizant of how they got there, how mob got there. So you need to have a knowledge around native title itself. So I think there needs to be courses that actually focus on that reality. The CNTA survey last year showed that anthropologists are working across a range of areas. Yes, 70% within the claim area, but you're working in a range of other areas as well. And I think that's actually something that's very constructive, and you can build on that. Interdisciplinary ways of working is the way of the future. Okay, so not one profession is the repository of all knowledge on the system, and it's actually coalescing the skill sets together to meet the needs of a client. And that's the way of the future, and that's what we need to teach. Teach people, or at least develop those skill sets to acquire that. However, there needs to be some specialization. And I think that, if we're going to be developing courses around general courses, so people have a general level of competency across a range of the functions of the Native Title Act, but there will need to be some specialization. But just like the legal profession has solicitors and barristers, I think anthropology, you need to start thinking about this, that, not everyone is going to want to be an expert to go and provide a report and be in the witness box and be cross-examined. So I think that there is a need to specialize on that particular skill set. And it's probably going to be up to others to have that discussion. I think the university sector, the tertiary sector, is critical to this phase, but we can't dissipate effort. There need to be at least a few universities that focus on providing a raft of subjects that I was just developing the skill sets that I was just referring to, and those universities, by a mix of being on campus and online, you might be able to then get a good cross section of skills. But I think every university or a number of universities doing the same thing in this niche area is going to be problematic. And I think governments and private sector definitely need to get on board to support. So just a few more slides left, David. So critical to this is building First Nation capability. So it's not just about us building professional services for the sake of it. These services have to be developed in partnership with First Nations, and there's got to be a transfer of those skill sets and working together as well. And so one thing I did like about the Working Future white paper is it actually did talk prominently about First Nations and how they actually need to be involved in this process. And I think that's actually a very positive movement into the future. I just want to conclude with recent developments. And in coming to this role back in July of last year, it's something that I've known for some time. I suspected, but there needs to be a really strong coordinated effort, and I think it actually starts with the Commonwealth agencies. And I'm pleased to say that the Commonwealth agencies, the 6 in the native title portfolio, have come together, and we've started to have a conversation around these broader issues around capability. We then took it to this broader group of Commonwealth agencies, then had a conversation with the National Native Title Council and the Centre for Native Title Anthropology around how we can actually get a system approach to building capability. And next month, we're then going to the ref body system and actually trying to encourage them to see the similar issues and to actually start developing a national strategy around how we can build capability. It might sound like something that should have been done ages ago, but the reality is that we've all been in our own little patches, working away and working earnestly and getting good results. But for the future, we need to do something differently, and actually coordinating is critical. And we've started humbly, we've started very modestly, and it was actually as simple as why don't we map out what we are all doing along a native title continuum? And it was actually in the mapping out of the services that we're providing that we actually realized that there was a lot of synergy in what we were doing. There was some duplication, but opportunities to do things vastly differently. And that's where the opportunity lies. And if we can actually multiply that with the rep body system, and that, we can build up a strategy, then I think we've got a chance of actually going to government and actually coming with a coherent, cogent narrative around what a native title industry would look like. And the four things that capability needs to address around structures. Sure, you can amend the Native Title Act. That's going to take time. Processes, I think, is going to be really important. The preservation of evidence or preservation of cultural knowledge, digitisation, they're processes that are going to value add to the system. This whole professional development is something that we've all got a vested interest in, and we should all be participating in that. And the resources should be focused around achieving those common objectives. So it's the start of a conversation, and all those things will be over the course of years, I would suspect, continue. But it's places like this where we started. So thank you very much.